The graduation ceremony was reaching its peak when Diego climbed onto the stage uninvited, interrupting the principal's speech. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him, including those of his parents and his sister Melissa, the graduate of the day. With a microphone in hand and a yellow envelope raised in the air, he declared in a firm voice, "I need everyone to see this before this farce continues." Silence took over the auditorium. His parents turned pale instantly. Everything had started 8 months earlier, when Diego, at 23 years old, finally conquered his first car after 3 years saving every penny from his salary as an IT technician. It was a blue sedan, nothing extravagant, but it represented his independence and the fruit of countless overtime hours and weekends worked. He parked the vehicle in the garage of his parents' house, where he still lived to save on rent, and felt accomplished for the first time in his life. The relationship with Melissa had always been complicated. She was the spoiled youngest, the daughter who never needed to work because their parents paid for everything, from designer clothes to trips with friends. Diego, on the other hand, started working at 16 and was always treated with a different level of demands. When he mentioned he had bought the car, Melissa made a face and commented that that model was already outdated, that she preferred something more modern. Their parents laughed, saying she had good taste. 3 months later, Diego returned from a work trip and found the garage empty. Desperate, he ran inside the house and found his mother preparing dinner calmly. When he asked about the car, she dried her hands on her apron and said casually, "Oh, we sold it. Melissa needed a vehicle for graduation, and that one was just sitting there." Diego felt the ground collapse beneath him. He demanded explanations from his father, who arrived minutes later and just shrugged, saying he could buy another one, but that Melissa needed it more at that moment because she was graduating and would get a better job with a car. The argument that followed was brutal. Diego screamed, cried, threatened to call the police. His father reacted with coldness, stating that as long as he lived in that house, everything there belonged to the family, including what was in the garage. His mother tried to calm the situation by offering to reimburse half the car's value in installments, but Diego refused. Melissa appeared in the living room jingling the keys and thanked their parents for the wonderful gift, completely ignoring her brother's despair. That night, Diego went to Rodrigo's house, his best friend since childhood and a newly graduated lawyer. Between beers and venting, Rodrigo analyzed the situation seriously. Diego had all the car documents in his name, payment receipts, invoices, and even messages exchanged with the seller. Rodrigo was direct. That was a crime, misappropriation, and Diego had a solid case. But there was a problem. Suing his own parents would destroy the family forever. Diego spent the night awake, deciding what to do. In the following days, he tried to talk rationally with his parents, but was ignored. Melissa drove around the neighborhood in the car, showing off to her friends. Aunt Carmen, his mother's sister, visited the family and was shocked to discover what had happened. She confronted her sister harshly, calling her unjust and cruel, but was expelled from the house by Diego's father, who said it was none of her business. Carmen called Diego afterward and offered help, saying she would testify in his favor if necessary. Diego decided to follow a different path. He continued living in the house, but completely cut communication with everyone, becoming a ghost within his own family. He ate at different times, locked himself in his room, and began to organize his revenge silently. Rodrigo helped him gather every document, every piece of evidence, every recorded conversation. At the same time, Diego sought out Bruno, a private investigator recommended by a co-worker. Bruno discovered that the parents had sold the car for a value well below market to an acquaintance, and this acquaintance was the uncle of one of Melissa's friends, meaning the sale was hastily arranged to benefit the youngest daughter. Meanwhile, Diego began attending support groups for people with family problems, where he met Helena, a 40-year-old psychologist who became his confidant. She helped him process the pain of betrayal without letting anger consume him completely. It was Helena who suggested that he not act on impulse, but plan a public revelation that would force his parents to face the consequences of their actions in front of everyone. When he learned the date of Melissa's graduation, Diego had the idea. Rodrigo initially thought it was risky, but agreed it would be effective. They prepared authenticated copies of all documents, including the car purchase receipt, bank statements showing the transfers made by Diego, and even a technical report proving that the vehicle had been sold below price as a favor. They also included screenshots of conversations where his mother admitted the sale and his father justified the decision. On graduation day, Diego arrived at the auditorium wearing his best suit. His parents found his presence strange, since he had said he wouldn't go, but didn't have time to question him. The ceremony began normally, with emotional speeches and diploma deliveries. When it was Melissa's turn to go on stage, Diego waited strategically. It was only after she received her diploma, during the principal's speech about the family values that support graduates, that he stood up and walked to the stage. The principal tried to stop him, but Diego had already grabbed the backup microphone. His voice echoed through the auditorium. "Sorry for the interruption, but I need to expose something that everyone here needs to know about family values." He showed the envelope and began narrating the entire story, detailing how he had saved for 3 years, bought the car, and how his parents sold it without permission to give as a gift to his sister. With each revelation, more people in the auditorium whispered in shock. Melissa tried to leave the stage, but Diego blocked her passage, not physically, but with words. "You knew that car wasn't a gift. You knew it was mine and accepted it anyway." Rodrigo, who was in the audience as planned, went up on stage and confirmed the information, showing copies of the documents to the principal and some nearby teachers. Diego's father tried to shout that this was absurd, but the course coordinator, a strict woman named Professor Andrea, asked for silence and demanded to see the documents. After analyzing them quickly, she took the microphone and declared that the institution did not condone dishonesty and that this situation would be investigated. Chaos ensued. Half the guests applauded Diego for his courage, while the other half booed for interrupting the ceremony. The parents tried to leave, but were surrounded by acquaintances demanding explanations. Aunt Carmen, present at the graduation, went up on stage and hugged Diego, publicly declaring her support. Melissa broke down in tears, not of regret, but of humiliation for having her day ruined. Some of her classmates, however, immediately distanced themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what had been revealed. In the days that followed, the story went viral on community social networks. Diego was contacted by a local television program that wanted to interview the family, but he refused, saying he wasn't seeking fame, just justice. The parents, pressured by the repercussion and by relatives who took Diego's side, finally gave in. They offered to return the full value of the car with interest, but Diego refused again. He demanded something different, that they sell a plot of land they owned that was destined to be Melissa's inheritance, using the money to reimburse Diego and donate the rest to an institution that helped young workers achieve independence. Rodrigo formalized the agreement at the notary's office. The parents, publicly destroyed and socially isolated, had no choice but to accept. Melissa, unable to deal with the shame, returned her diploma and moved to another region, cutting contact with the entire family. Diego used the money to rent an apartment and buy a new car, better than the previous one. He never returned to his parents' house again. 6 months later, Diego ran into his father at a supermarket. The man was visibly aged, pushing a cart alone. They looked at each other for long seconds. His father opened his mouth as if to say something, but Diego simply turned his back and continued his shopping. There was no more anger, no sadness, just indifference. And that, Diego realized, was the cruelest revenge of all. But the story didn't end there. What Diego didn't know was that his public exposure had triggered a chain of events that would extend far beyond his personal vendetta. 2 weeks after the graduation incident, Rodrigo received a call at his law office. It was from a woman named Patricia, who identified herself as a former employee of Diego's father's company. She had seen the news about the incident and wanted to share information that might interest them. Patricia revealed that Diego's father, Roberto, had a history of financial misconduct at his workplace. She had been his secretary for 5 years before being fired without cause, and during that time, she had witnessed several irregularities. Roberto had been embezzling company funds through false expense reports and phantom suppliers. Patricia had kept copies of suspicious documents, hoping one day to expose him, but had been afraid of retaliation. Now, seeing Diego stand up to his father so publicly, she felt empowered to come forward. Rodrigo immediately informed Diego, who was stunned by this revelation. His father had always presented himself as an upright businessman, a pillar of morality in the community. To discover that he was corrupt added another layer of betrayal to Diego's already broken relationship with his family. But this information also presented an opportunity. If Roberto was indeed embezzling funds, he could face criminal charges that went far beyond the car incident. Diego and Rodrigo met with Patricia at a coffee shop. She was a woman in her 50s, nervous but determined. She spread out photocopies of documents on the table, invoices from suppliers that didn't exist, expense reports for business trips that never happened, and email exchanges that proved Roberto knew exactly what he was doing. The amounts were substantial, totaling hundreds of thousands over several years. "Why didn't you report this before?" Diego asked. Patricia's hands trembled as she held her coffee cup. "Because I was scared. Your father has connections. When I tried to ask questions about some irregularities, I was let go the next week. No explanation, no severance beyond what was legally required. I couldn't prove anything alone, and I have a daughter to support. I couldn't risk being blacklisted in the industry." Rodrigo examined the documents carefully. "This is serious. If even half of this is verifiable, Roberto could face jail time." Diego felt a mixture of emotions. Part of him wanted to see his father face justice for all his wrongdoings, but another part, despite everything, hesitated at the thought of sending his own father to prison. Helena's words echoed in his mind from their sessions. "Revenge could consume you if you let it." "What do you want to do?" Rodrigo asked, watching his friend carefully. Diego was silent for a long moment. "I want to think about this." "Can we hold on to these documents for now?" Patricia agreed, making Rodrigo promise to keep the copies safe. As they left the coffee shop, Diego felt the weight of this new information pressing down on him. His simple act of exposing his parents at Melissa's graduation had opened a door he hadn't expected. That night, Diego couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his father, about the man he thought he knew versus the man who was being revealed. Roberto had always been strict, demanding, sometimes cold, but a criminal. Diego had never imagined that. He wondered if his mother knew about the embezzlement, or if she was as much in the dark as he had been. The next morning, Diego received an unexpected visitor at his new apartment. It was his mother, Maria. She looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair unkempt. Diego almost didn't recognize her. She had always been so put together, so concerned with appearances. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Diego hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. They sat in the small living room, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. "Your father is falling apart," Maria finally said. "The scandal from the graduation has destroyed his reputation. He lost several business clients. People crossed the street to avoid talking to him. And you're here because you want me to feel sorry for him?" Diego's voice was flat. "No." Maria looked down at her hands. "I'm here because I need to tell you something. I didn't know he was going to sell your car. When I found out, it was already done. I should have fought harder to stop it, to make him return it to you. But I've spent so many years just going along with what Roberto wants, not making waves, that I didn't know how to stand up to him anymore." Diego studied his mother's face. For the first time in his life, he saw her as a person separate from his father, not just as one half of a parental unit that had betrayed him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I've been a coward for too long, and I'm watching my family disintegrate because of it." Tears started rolling down Maria's cheeks. "Melissa won't talk to any of us. Roberto barely speaks to me. And you look at us like we're strangers. I deserve that. I know I do. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Diego didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to accept her apology, to believe that she was genuinely remorseful. But another part remembered her casual tone when she first told him about selling his car, her attempt to offer half the money back as if that would fix everything. "I appreciate you coming here," Diego said carefully, "but I'm not ready to forgive yet. Maybe I never will be." Maria nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. I just wanted you to know the truth." She stood up to leave, then paused. "There's something else." Roberto has been acting strange lately. Nervous. He's been getting phone calls that upset him. I think something is wrong at his company. After his mother left, Diego called Rodrigo and told him about the visit. They agreed it was time to make a decision about Patricia's information. They couldn't sit on evidence of financial crimes indefinitely. "We should turn it over to the authorities," Rodrigo said. "It's the right thing to do, regardless of your personal feelings." Diego knew he was right. The next day, they met with Patricia again and convinced her to file a formal complaint with the police and the company's board of directors. Rodrigo would represent her pro bono, ensuring she was protected from retaliation. The investigation into Roberto's activities began quietly, but within 2 weeks, news broke that he had been suspended from his position pending an audit. Diego watched the news reports with mixed feelings. His father's face appeared on screen, looking cornered and defensive as reporters shouted questions at him. Melissa called Diego for the first time since the graduation. Her voice was cold, angry. "Are you satisfied now? You've destroyed him completely. First the graduation, now this. What more do you want?" "I didn't start this investigation," Diego replied calmly. "But I won't apologize for the truth coming out." "You're vindictive and cruel," Melissa spat. "I hope you can live with yourself knowing you ruined your own family." "I can live with myself just fine," Diego said. "Can you live with yourself knowing you accepted a car that was stolen from your own brother?" Melissa hung up without answering. Diego sat in his apartment staring at his phone. He didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he would. Instead, he felt tired. Tired of the conflict, tired of the drama, tired of carrying this burden. He called Helena and scheduled an emergency session. When he arrived at her office, she could see the exhaustion written all over his face. "Talk to me," she said gently. Diego told her everything. About Patricia, the investigation, his mother's visit, Melissa's phone call. When he finished, he looked at Helena desperately. "Did I do the right thing? Sometimes I feel like I'm the villain in this story." Helena leaned forward in her chair. "Diego, you didn't embezzle company funds. You didn't sell someone else's property without permission. You didn't enable bad behavior or turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. You simply refused to let injustice stand. That doesn't make you a villain. But my family is destroyed," Diego said. "Your family was broken long before you exposed it," Helena replied. "You just forced everyone to see the cracks that were already there. Sometimes destruction is necessary before rebuilding can happen." The audit of Roberto's company took 3 months. During that time, Diego focused on his own life. He got a promotion at work, his technical skills finally being recognized and valued. He started dating someone he met at a tech conference, a woman named Julia who knew nothing about his family drama and liked him for who he was, not who his family expected him to be. When the audit results came out, they confirmed everything Patricia had documented and more. Roberto had embezzled nearly $500,000 over 6 years. The company filed criminal charges, and the prosecutor's office built a case for fraud and theft. Roberto's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was too strong. He was facing significant prison time. The day of Roberto's trial, Diego sat in the courtroom gallery. He hadn't planned to go, but something drew him there. He needed to see it through, to witness the end of this chapter. His mother was there too, sitting alone on the other side of the courtroom. Melissa was absent. Roberto sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller somehow, diminished. The trial lasted 3 days. Patricia testified, presenting her evidence clearly and professionally. The company's auditor explained the extent of the financial misconduct. Roberto's defense was weak. He had no real explanation for the phantom suppliers and false expenses. His lawyer tried to paint him as a man who made mistakes under pressure, but the jury wasn't sympathetic. On the 3rd day, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Roberto's face went white. The judge set a sentencing date for 2 weeks later. As the bailiff led Roberto away, he looked across the courtroom and his eyes met Diego's. There was no anger there, no defiance, just defeat, and perhaps finally, recognition of the harm he had caused. Diego left the courthouse and found Aunt Carmen waiting outside. She had attended all 3 days of the trial, sitting next to Maria in silent support. "How are you holding up?" Carmen asked, pulling Diego into a hug. "I don't know what I'm feeling," Diego admitted. I thought I would feel vindicated, but I just feel hollow. That's because you're a good person, Carmen said. Bad people celebrate when others fall. Good people understand that everyone's downfall diminishes us all in some way. Maria approached them hesitantly. Carmen squeezed Diego's arm and walked away, giving them space. Will you come to the sentencing? Maria asked. Diego considered. I don't think so. I've seen enough. He's asking if you'll visit him. After. When he's sent away. Diego shook his head slowly. I can't do that. Not now. Maybe not ever. Maria nodded, accepting his answer. I'm filing for divorce. I should have done it years ago. I'm moving in with Carmen for a while, until I figure out my next steps. That's probably wise, Diego said. I know you can't forgive us. Forgive me, right now. But I hope someday you might consider it. Maria reached out and briefly touched Diego's arm. I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. You built a life for yourself without our help. And you stood up for what was right even when it cost you everything. That takes real strength. Diego felt his throat tighten. He nodded but couldn't speak. Maria gave him a sad smile and walked away. 2 weeks later, Roberto was sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3. The case made regional news, a cautionary tale about corruption and family dysfunction. Diego ignored the media requests for interviews. He had said everything he needed to say that day at Melissa's graduation. Life gradually returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Diego's relationship with Julia deepened. She knew about his family situation by then, and her acceptance of his complicated past meant everything to him. He got another promotion at work, now leading a team of junior technicians. He moved to a better apartment, one with a dedicated parking spot where his new car sat safely every night. Rodrigo opened his own law practice, specializing in employment law and family disputes. He took on cases of people who had been wronged by those in power, offering sliding-scale fees and sometimes working pro bono. Patricia was his first client, and her successful case against Roberto gave Rodrigo's new practice credibility and purpose. Helena continued working with Diego for several more months, helping him process the complicated emotions that came with dismantling his family. Eventually, their sessions tapered off as Diego found stability and peace. On their last session, Helena told him something he would never forget. You came to me broken, angry, and lost. You're leaving here whole, principled, and found. That transformation wasn't because of me. It was because you chose truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, and self-respect over acceptance. Those are rare qualities, Diego. Don't ever lose them. 8 months after Roberto's sentencing, Diego was working late at the office when he received an email that made him freeze. It was from Melissa. The subject line read, I'm sorry. Diego stared at the email for a long time before opening it. Inside was a long message, rambling and emotional. Melissa wrote about how she had spent the past year in therapy, confronting her own entitled behavior and privilege. She described the collapse of her social circle after the graduation incident, how people she thought were friends had abandoned her when her family's reputation crumbled. She had been forced to get a job for the first time in her life, working retail, and learning what it meant to earn her own money. I was raised to believe I deserved things simply because I wanted them, she wrote. I never understood what you went through, working from the time you were 16, saving every penny, sacrificing so much. When I accepted that car, I told myself it was fine because Mom and Dad gave it to me. I convinced myself that made it okay, but I knew deep down that it was yours. I knew, and I took it anyway because I always got what I wanted. I'm sorry. I know that word is inadequate for the harm I caused, but it's all I have. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for us to have a relationship again. I'm just telling you that I finally understand what I did was wrong, and I'm trying to become a better person. I hope you're happy, Diego. You deserve to be. Diego read the email 3 times. He thought about responding, but in the end, he simply filed it away in a folder and closed his laptop. Melissa's apology was a step in her own healing, but Diego didn't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not a relationship. Maybe someday he would feel differently, but today was not that day. Another year passed. Diego and Julia got engaged. They planned a small wedding with close friends only. no family. Rodrigo would be his best man, and Helena received an invitation as a special guest. Diego had built a new family from the people who chose to stand by him, who valued him for who he was. The night before his wedding, Diego couldn't sleep. He got up and drove through the empty streets, not really knowing where he was going until he found himself parked outside his old house. The lights were off. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. Maria had moved on, and apparently, she was selling the family home. Diego sat in his car, looking at the dark windows. He thought about all the years he had lived in that house, the memories both good and bad. He thought about the boy he had been, desperate for his parents' approval, and the man he had become, no longer needing it. He thought about the blue sedan that had started this entire chain of events, and how something as simple as a car had revealed the true nature of the people he loved. His phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Can't sleep either. Come home." Diego smiled. Home wasn't that dark house with the for sale sign anymore. Home was the apartment where Julia was waiting, where his life existed separate from his past. He started the car and drove away, not looking back at the house in his rearview mirror. The wedding was perfect in its simplicity. 60 guests, a small garden venue, and vows that Diego and Julia wrote themselves. When Diego stood at the altar and looked out at the people gathered, friends, colleagues, chosen family, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. During the reception, Aunt Carmen pulled him aside. "Your mother wanted me to give you something." She handed him a small wrapped box. Diego hesitated. "She's not here, is she?" "No. She knew you didn't want her to come, but she wanted you to have this." Diego unwrapped the box and found his baby bracelet from the hospital, the one with his name and birth date stamped on tiny beads. There was a note in his mother's handwriting. "You were always strong, even from the beginning. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Love, Mom." Diego's eyes burned with unexpected tears. Carmen hugged him tightly. "It's okay to still love them while not letting them back into your life," she whispered. "Those two things can exist together." That night, as Diego and Julia danced their first dance as husband and wife, Diego caught Rodrigo's eye across the room. His friend raised his glass in a silent toast. They had come so far from that night of beers and desperation, when Diego's world was falling apart, and Rodrigo helped him find a way forward. Diego raised his own glass in return, grateful beyond words for the people who had stood by him when his own family wouldn't. The story of Diego and his family's implosion became somewhat legendary in their community. People spoke about it in hushed tones as a cautionary tale, about favoritism, about taking people for granted, about how family could betray you in ways strangers never would. But for Diego, it had become something else. The story of how he found his spine, his voice, and his worth. 3 years after the graduation incident, Diego received news that Roberto was up for parole. The prosecutor's office contacted him to see if he wanted to make a statement. Diego declined. Roberto's punishment was never about revenge for Diego. It was about accountability. Whether Roberto served 3 years or 5 didn't matter to Diego anymore. His father's choices had consequences, and that was enough. Diego never did run into his father at that supermarket or anywhere else after the initial months. Roberto, once released, moved to a different area entirely, reportedly living in a small apartment and working in a position far below his former status. Melissa kept her distance, continuing her own journey of self-improvement without involving Diego. Maria occasionally sent cards on Diego's birthday, which he read but never responded to. The indifference Diego had imagined feeling toward his father did eventually come, but it brought with it an unexpected peace. He no longer lay awake at night replaying arguments in his head. He didn't wonder what he could have done differently to make his parents love him more equally. He simply lived his life, built his career, loved his wife, and surrounded himself with people who respected him. On his 30th birthday, Julia threw him a surprise party. The room was filled with laughter, music, and genuine affection. Rodrigo made a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about resilience and integrity. Helena attended with her husband, proud of the growth she had witnessed in her former client. Aunt Carmen brought an enormous cake and told embarrassing stories from Diego's childhood that made everyone laugh. As Diego looked around the room that night, he realized something profound. The family that had rejected him, that had stolen from him and betrayed him, had inadvertently given him the greatest gift of all. They had forced him to learn that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice, respect, and mutual support. Every person in that room had chosen to be there, had chosen to celebrate him, had chosen to be part of his life. That choice meant more than any biological bond ever could. Diego never wrote a book about his experience. He never sought publicity or tried to profit from his pain. The yellow envelope from the graduation ceremony sat in a box in his closet, a reminder of the day he chose himself over family harmony. Sometimes Julia asked if he ever regretted what he did, standing up on that stage and exposing everything. Never, Diego always answered. Not for a single moment. Because the truth was, that moment on the stage wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. It was the moment Diego stopped being a victim and became the author of his own life. Everything that followed, all the growth and healing and new relationships, stemmed from that one decision to speak his truth regardless of the cost. Years later, when Diego and Julia had their first child, a baby boy, they named him Mateo. Diego held his son in his arms and made a silent promise. This child would never be second best, would never be taken for granted, would never have to fight for basic recognition and respect in his own family. The cycle of favoritism and betrayal ended here, with this generation. Aunt Carmen visited the hospital and held her great-nephew with tears in her eyes. "He looks like you did as a baby," she said softly. Then, meeting Diego's eyes, she added, "You're going to be an amazing father. You already know everything about what not to do." Diego laughed despite himself. It was true. His parents had provided a perfect blueprint of mistakes to avoid. In a strange way, their failure as parents ensured his success as one. He would learn from their example by doing the exact opposite in every way that mattered. The blue sedan that started it all was long gone, sold or scrapped or sitting in someone else's driveway. But its legacy lived on in the man Diego had become, someone who wouldn't accept injustice, who valued his own worth, who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't appreciate you, even if those people are family. And in his darkest moments, when doubt crept in and he wondered if he had been too harsh, too unforgiving, too willing to burn bridges, Diego would remember that moment at the supermarket that never actually happened but lived vividly in his mind. He imagined running into his father, seeing the defeat in his eyes, and feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sadness, just indifference. Just the peaceful recognition that some relationships are beyond repair, and that's okay. The cruelest revenge Diego had discovered wasn't destruction. It was living well without them. It was building a life so full of love and purpose and success that their absence didn't leave a void. It was becoming the person he was meant to be, not despite his family's betrayal, but because of the strength he discovered in surviving it. Diego's story didn't have a fairy tale ending where everyone reconciled and lived happily ever after. But it had something better. A real ending where wounds healed even if scars remained, where justice was served even if imperfectly, and where a young man who had been stolen from learned that he couldn't be robbed of the things that mattered most: his integrity, his resilience, and his capacity to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed.